What I'm hoping to do today is to run through in an hour and a half some of the key things about business planning in this crisis situation, but also I've seen your responses when you joined the training, and there's a huge amount of experience and senior level experience as well in the virtual room today. So I'm hoping that when I stop for each section, because it's sectioned off the presentation, then we'll be able to have some feedback and people will be able to raise some issues there. As Elaine says, I've got a lot of experience of supporting museums and heritage organisations with business planning, and so I support museums in the East Midlands with the organisational health planning with museum development, but I do a lot of work for the Heritage Fund and spend a lot of my time nagging people about their, it feels like anyway, about their cash flow and other ways of sorting out their business planning. So I hope today that I'm able to share some of that with you, but I'm sure there is massive expertise in the room as well. But I think it's about trying to just be a benchmark really, and a place for you to be able to take some stock really. So I've got a series of slides which I'm going to talk to, and then, as I say, we'll have some discussion at some points along the way. So that the sections that we're going to cover, this is what I'm hoping that we're going to cover this afternoon, are first of all about taking stock and thinking what your key issues are. And obviously the COVID crisis has been going on for quite a few weeks now, and I imagine that at some, you know, right at the beginning you'd have thought, gosh, what are we going to do and what does our business planning think about, although it might have been a bit more of a reaction rather than a planned thing. So I think yeah, that taking stock's important. Then we're going to cover some of the things about your key purpose and your organisational priorities, and getting us just to think about what that means again. There's a section about finances. So I don't know how well people plan their finances. In my experience, you can get people who are do it massively well, really detailed, to people who don't even set a museum budget. So it'd be interesting to know where you think you are on that scale. And then some discussion about operations. So how does the business plan, how is that sort of influencing operations, and what does that look like on the ground? And then finally, thinking about what's next. Reopening, it could well be around the corner for some people, and for others it might not be something that's happening this year. So I think it's about thinking about what that means for you and for your business plan, your finances particularly, and also all the other elements that go with that. So that's what I'm hoping to cover. Obviously, if we get time at the end, if there's anything else that we haven't covered, then people will be more than welcome to pitch in with anything that they think's relevant. I think one of the really useful things about these sessions is that peer support for people. So we might have people in the room who are out there on their own a little bit, and will really value having a bit of a discussion with their colleagues. So I trust that's all right with everybody. I can't see everybody, you see, all at once, so that's good too, because if you're shaking your head, then I won't know. Okay, so the first section is about taking stock. So actually thinking about what your key issues are. So I'm sort of interested in what you think your key issues are, and when we've just finished this slide, we'll have a bit of discussion and you can probably say what you think the key issues are. But some of the things that we think are important, obviously absolutely top priority is the well-being of staff and volunteers, and obviously when the museum reopens, that's visitors too, isn't it? So thinking about where, you know, how well people are physically, how they are, but also how they're coping with lockdown, whether they've been furloughed, how your volunteers are, because obviously lots of our volunteers can be in the elderly category, so they might be self-isolating, they might be shielding, might be very lonely actually, because some people are living alone and having to deal with all that at the same time. So it's that sort of well-being of staff and volunteers, but also, of course, when we reopen, providing that confidence to people, to visitors, that we are providing an experience that means they're safe and that they're going to have a good time, but also that the people who are out there on the front line, front of house, also feel safe and confident. So it's about some of those key issues about that. And then I think it's also about thinking, what did you want the outcome of this period to be? I mean, we're in lockdown, we've been closed. What's the outcome? Is it literally just trying to get to the survival stage, or have there been other outcomes of this period that you think were important? What steps have you taken already with your business plan? So have you been reviewing it? Have the board or the senior management been able to meet virtually and talk about things, or has that not been possible? And then having that sort of taking a breath thing is also about looking ahead and thinking about what's your plan for the future. So within your business plan, how far ahead can you look? What's realistic? And what are you actually planning to do? So thinking about organisational priorities. And what does planning in a crisis mean? Now, it sounds like some of you've been doing this already, but so this will be a refresher, I imagine. But I think it's about knowing that our plans are about something that's immediate and that they will change. And I don't know how often you might have started planning and had something that lasted maybe 2 weeks and then thought, oh, well, now something else has come in left field and we've got to incorporate that. But I think having a plan and reviewing and updating it does really help move things forward, and it gives you that overview and that picture of what the organisational state of play actually is. So thinking about what your priorities are now, so that sort of link to immediacy, yes, having the view on the longer term, if you like, but what are the priorities now? So it's that thing about thinking about well-being of staff and volunteers and how you're managing that, but also, you know, having to close your organisations, close the museums down. What did that mean? What does that mean for the business planning? Trying to work out where the money's coming in or not, where you can save money. So that's quite important. Understanding who's in your team and what their roles are. Now, a lot of our sector has been furloughed, so it's about understanding who's actually left in the team. Is it at this point that the board has to step up because there are no staff underneath to be able to do anything, and so the board then has to become more involved with things than it might have previously done, you know, more operational things than it might have done, but also understanding, you know, what skills are in the team, and sometimes you are surprised by the things people, you know, are able to do, or you didn't know there was a skill there in a team member. So sort of being absolutely clear about what people's roles are, and then how a decision's being made. So interestingly, thinking about, I mean, obviously we haven't been able to meet, decisions haven't been able to be made by governing bodies in the same way. I don't know whether you've been meeting remotely and making decisions remotely. There's been new legislation, hasn't there, through, or they were planning it through, about companies and AGMs and board meetings to relax the rules on that. Charity Commission have said that they want people to be pragmatic about being able to make decisions and hold meetings remotely, making sure that you make very good notes and minutes, of course, of things. So how are your decisions being made, and where does that sit? How are you identifying and managing risk? Do people have a risk register? Show of hands, please. I can't see everybody all at once. Not everybody. Not everybody. Okay. Well, that's okay. I mean, thanks for being honest. That's good. I think identifying and managing risk is really important, and actually feeds so directly into your business planning. and will do now, particularly because, you know, understanding that and understanding health and safety and how that relates to people as well. Having some accurate and current information helps you to plan. So whether that's about finances, plans that you had, exhibitions that were coming up, understanding which objects you've got on loan, understand, you know, all of those sorts of things, but having information that helps you to plan realistically. And then understanding what you can and what you want to achieve. So if you're talking about immediate planning to get you through a crisis, what is it that you actually want to achieve? Lots of people I've spoken to, they just want to get to survival, really, and to the point where they can reopen and there will be cash coming through the door in some respect. I don't know what that's like for you, but that's definitely about some of the feedback I've had. Understanding and being clear about who your stakeholders are, and then making some link to think about what are their needs. How can we as a museum, maybe now in the crisis or definitely when we're coming out of it, how are we able to sort of work with them and maybe help them meet some of their needs as well? So that links in to how you communicate with people. So Sarah, you talked about communication and digitally doing that, but it's also about how you communicate with stakeholders, funders, your audiences, and what actually you're going to be saying. What are you going to be communicating to them? So I think this whole crisis planning, some of it is very similar to when we're thinking about business planning generally, but a lot of it is about the immediacy. So it's about thinking, you know, how far ahead are we going to plan, what's happening now, and how are we going to do that, and how are we going to articulate it. One thing I'd say about just going back to risk is it's not just about operational risk. It's it can be governance risk, it can be compliance and legal risk, it can be your financial risk, it's your external risks as well. On the, I don't know, you might already know about this, but on the Charity Commission website, there is a whole document about managing risk, and it's got some useful examples at the end of the document, and you know, about things to ask yourself. It doesn't mention COVID-19, surprisingly, but it does talk about risk. So I would say every board should, and governing body should be thinking and identifying and managing its risk for its museums. So, and I just wanted to within this section just pull you back to remembering what your current forward plan says. So do revisit what your current forward plan said you were going to do, or your business plan. And remember, you're an accredited museum, or working towards, I don't know what your status is, but and so I just put this slide up really to remind us what the accreditation standard says. And the key point about it is that it says that museums need to plan for the long term and be able to adapt in this changing environment. And I just listed the key points about it, about your business planning, and how important it is to think about realigning your current plan to meet the needs. I mean, I think the Arts Council are expecting that everybody's business plan, forward plan, is going to be changing as part of the accreditation scheme. My feeling is they should trust us to just get on with it. And I don't know if that, I shouldn't imagine that they'll want to see everybody's forward plan that's changed out of this before their normal time for their accreditation return. But I think it is important to remember what you said you were going to do and where you were going to align your finances, and where some of those key things were, you know, within your business plan, and think about realigning that. So do have a look, but I don't know how often you look at your forward plan. In my idealistic world, you see, you should be it should be a monitoring and evaluation tool, and the governing body should be looking at it periodically, and people should be, it should be something that people are using to monitor progress. That's not to say it has to stand still, it shouldn't be standing still, but it's something to see how you're getting on. So, and finally, last slide in this section is about staff and volunteers. So on this sort of organisational priorities thing, again, I've mentioned this several times, but it's about understanding how you're staying in touch with people. So people will have been working from home, or they'll have been furloughed, or there'll be volunteers who haven't been in, and so they'll be at home. Or you might have had people coming onto site periodically to check on collections or do security or environmental monitoring. So it's understanding what people's different needs are and how the museum can respond to that in some ways. I mean, I've heard of examples of, board members having responsibility for small groups of volunteers, so ringing them up once a fortnight and just checking they're okay and saying hello. We've had volunteers doing different volunteering roles while they've been at home. Some people have been updating the collections management system, those kinds of things, or doing some research. We've had newsletters that people have created. I'm sure you'll be able to throw some things in when we stop this session, but I'm interested as to what people are doing. Are staff working from home, and is this continuing and sustainable? I think some people might have an office space at home. I'm self-employed, so I've got an office space. I'm having to share it with my other half, who isn't here at the moment, you'll be glad to know. But it's been a bit of a challenge to work that out. So, and I know some staff home working are, literally sat under the stairs. So is this something that's continuing and sustainable, or is everybody going to come back, and how do people feel about it? Really interesting also thinking about your volunteer base. So we've already raised that thing about volunteers who might be older and having needing confidence about coming back to volunteer, and what that means for front of house. And I think it's thinking about what is that going to mean, and are there things we can do to support those people, but also to think about what volunteer diversity might look like in the future. And then thinking about training and development. Do we need new skills? So we've talked about that, about digital and about understanding different ways we can communicate with people, but also about, learning new skills about taking money, for example, and things like that. And obviously during this furloughed period, although people have been furloughed, they have been able to take part in training and development, even though they've been furloughed and they're not meant to be working at all, but they have been able to do that. But I think there is that whole need to sort of think, what do we need in skills, and how within the business planning are we going to help and adapt to anything new that we need? I mean, even reopening is going to need some new training and development for people, isn't it? Just thinking about what that means. I've got 3 slides about finances. Some of it we've covered already, but understanding and continuing to manage the information about finances is absolutely crucial. And I think that thing about, when I talked about managing information, people who are in the positions of making the overarching decisions need to understand what the finances mean. So if you're presenting the finances to the board or your senior managers or whatever, you need to make sure that they understand what the numbers mean, because some people aren't as proficient at understanding. You present them with a cash flow, and they might not understand exactly what that means, or they might not understand the difference between the cash flow and the balance sheet, for example. But in this crisis situation, managing the cash flow is absolutely crucial, because it's understanding where those pressure points are. So when you look at that bottom line, you understand where you're going in the red, if you're going in the red, or where you might be able to manipulate some literally dates of payments coming in or out, how long you can actually continue operating for. And actually, cash flow forecasting is the best guess at predicting if you're facing insolvency. Now, I don't know if anybody is here this afternoon thinking we might be in that category quite soon or not, or they might not want to say, but I've had several conversations with museums who are, you know, really worried about becoming insolvent in the next 3 to 6 months. Which is where some of this emergency funding from Arts Council and Heritage Fund has been absolutely critical to them. But it doesn't necessarily, you know, they might well be in this position this time next year if things don't pick up. So I think that cash flow forecasting is absolutely imperative. Do people use a cash flow already? Sort of. Some people, yeah. So you know what I'm talking about then. With a, I have got I've got an example of a cash flow which has got no numbers in it, but I could show it at the end. I've got it up on an Excel spreadsheet if anybody's interested. But you've probably got your own. But it's about understanding the impact of your reduced income and how you're going to mitigate that. So I presume that's been absolutely forefront of your thinking, but also understanding what are your fixed costs. So what are things that you cannot get out of paying? Do you have contracts in place where you can negotiate different payment terms, for example? So you might want to talk about, when we come off this, which contracts you might have in place, but it could be things as, you know, like you might rent the photocopier, or you might have an ongoing contract with a firm that comes in and, I don't know, cuts the grass or something. Will you need to think about staff redeployment and or redundancies? So I know in local government, quite a lot of our museum people would have been redeployed to other areas of the councils that they're in. And none of us know what that's going to mean in the long term. Obviously, we hope they're going to come back to their roles. But some other organisations are also looking at, you know, is this, when people come back off furlough, are they actually going to have enough money to keep the staff on, or are they going to be looking at redundancies? So I think there's a lot of thinking, and it's difficult stuff to do around this. Then it's about thinking, what's your reserves looking like? Do you have restricted funds, and can these be accessed? I put that in because I've had quite a few conversations with museums that tell me they've got restricted funds. They're not really restricted. They've restricted them because they want to spend that money on conserving a railway engine, also, for example. But it isn't that the money's actually restricted. It's just that they've got a desire to spend it on that. So I think that discussion we had at the beginning about thinking about how you feel like you might have, you've got to tell the narrative to the funders about reserves is important, and about understanding that you might want to not spend all of your reserves, because what you need to look at is going beyond this initial crisis. How are you going to rebuild those reserves back up again? Things are tight, aren't they? People aren't necessarily going to have as much money as before. So it's quite important to think carefully about that. Are there any payments you can delay? So I'm obviously not suggesting that you want to send other people or companies into insolvency, but there might be payments that you can delay. Are you owed any money? So is there anything that somebody owes you? Make sure you invoice what you're owed, follow up with any funds that are currently owing, and check your constitution if you're a charitable organisation. What does it say about insolvency and winding up? Now, I know that's a bit, you might think, oh, we don't want to do that, but actually it's much better to know what your position is so that you can decide how things are working out. I've had a conversation with an organisation who have decided they aren't going to continue, but they've got 2 years worth of tick over money, if you like, and they've decided that they're going to do a measured close down, and they're going to wind up, and but they've got 2 years to do it. So I think thinking about those decisions and checking what it says in the Constitution is quite important. Some constitutions might be quite old and they might not say anything about winding up, in which case you might find that checking your Constitution might raise some issues for the future about revisiting your governance structures and thinking about things that might need a bit of a revision. So that's the first thing I'd say about finances. And then second slide is thinking about things. Are you, have you maximised the support from the government? Obviously, the job retention scheme now has stopped. You can't add people to that scheme. I mean, it's still going on if you're already furloughed, but you can't add new people to it. Are you taking advantage of the VAT, if you're paying VAT, the VAT holiday and the any business support, in business interruption loans, or the I've lost track of all the things the government's offering. There's the holiday, the payment holidays, isn't it? Time to pay, HMRC time to pay. So if you're struggling to pay taxes, then you can get in touch with HMRC and talk to them about that. There's the business rates holiday that organisations are having, and also the money that's come, the business rates money that's come through the local government. So as well as them having discretionary funds as well to do with that for small businesses. So it might be that there's all these things that add up, and some of these things have been absolutely imperative for some of our small museums and actually stop them from going under, and will enable them to survive. So some of these things have been really important. And then thinking, will you be applying for some emergency funding from National Lottery Heritage Fund, Historic England, or a grant from the Museum Development Programme? Did you apply for some money from the Arts Council? That programme's now, funding is now over, but that's not to say there might not be other funding opportunities coming up in the future. And how prepared are you for applying for that money? So understanding about what's out there and grasping all of those opportunities. Sometimes it can be a bit scary to have to think, oh, I've got to apply for this and that and all the rest of it. And you might not be hugely experienced, or the people who are left doing it might not be hugely experienced, but there is support out there. So your museum development team are there to help you. Do you have any loans, mortgages that you can negotiate with the lender for more favourable payment terms? And if you're receiving grant funding for something, so if you're in the middle of a lottery funded capital work, for example, you need to speak to the funder if you're unable to deliver the outcomes, but you need to make sure you're submitting your report and your payment requests on time. My experience of the Heritage Fund has been that they've been really keen to support people that they are currently funding and helping them to repurpose grants if that's more appropriate, and looking at different ways to interpret outcomes. So I think they've been really flexible on that. Are you in touch with your bank? Do you need an overdraft? Are you applying for a business interruption loan? Obviously, these things have to be paid back. So they're not grants, but it is a way of thinking about your finances. And there's information on the Museum Development Programme website. So there's information there. And the Association of Independent Museums also has quite a lot of information on their website. So if you're an AIM member, you can also have the Charity Finance Group free membership. I don't know if anybody's taken advantage of that, but all of the resources on the AIM website are free of charge. Okay, last one, and then I'll open it up to you. But this was about income generation. So we've talked about, you know, income generation that might be coming or not through more of a digital offer, and what that might look like, what people are prepared to pay for. But thinking about what your income sources were before and what your options are now. So I've just put a list there of things that I thought were possible areas that you might get income from. But understanding what that impact is going to be is really important. So obviously entrance fees and events might not be happening. Schools will be very different, I imagine. Shop, cafe, all of it. I don't know whether your memberships and your friends groups might stay the same, or what you've decided to do about that. People might be getting a reduced offer from you, but they might well be prepared to say, I'm supporting the museum and so I'm keeping my membership and I'm continue to pay it. But I don't know how people are playing that one actually, really. And then thinking about fundraising, unless you're actually, you know, absolutely going under, I think the sort of feeling is that unless it's a critical fundraising campaign, it's maybe not the right time to be doing massive of fundraising in that way. But what's more important is about developing those relationships and keeping those relationships going, and being able to articulate your position accurately, which is why understanding the finances is so important. And then thinking, is there anything that you can do now to support funders in this crisis? So is there anything you can do, some good news stories you can write, some anything that might help them so that they continue to see you as something that's supporting them as well? So it's more of a partnership rather than a one-way street. So just moving on to think about operations and how that relates to your business planning. And I'm sure you've been doing this, but your general maintenance and site checking for security and environmental monitoring, have you been using your emergency plan? Anybody want to admit to that? Anybody nodding? No? Yes? Yes, yes, people are nodding, excellent. You know, the management and care of the collections, I imagine you've been keeping you know, an eye on that. Thinking about loan agreements and your contractual requirements to that. So have you spoken to the lenders and thought about a way forward? Because obviously things you're in, you know, you might have had an exhibition where you were borrowing objects, and the loan agreements might be at a certain point, or you can't fulfill all of the obligations of the loan agreement. Have staff been spending any time productively on developing resources? You know, has this been an opportunity for updating policies and plans? And there still is an opportunity there. Accreditation is currently on hold until it starts up again next April, but it is an ideal opportunity for people who are at home, potentially working from home, not furloughed, but working from home, to be thinking about policies and plans that might need an update. NCVO, Elaine mentioned them earlier, and they've removed their paywall. I don't know if people have seen that, but there are some really useful resources on there that, you know, can help with not museum specific, but charity specific, particularly policies and plans from that point of view. And for obviously for the full range of museum specific support, Collections Trust has put a whole range of information about collections on its website, and all of the accreditation information is on there, as well as being on the Arts Council website. So that's sort of your museum site maintenance, keeping on top of that, and I'm sure you might have some things to say about that. But I also put this slide in about communicating in lockdown. So I don't know what, obviously you've been doing some brilliant things, you've been out there doing things digitally, but remembering to focus on what your key purpose is and what is your immediate plan to deliver this. And I think part of that is really important when you're looking at business planning, is remembering what your key purpose is and what you're here for, and what your purpose is actually, and what you're doing to deliver that. but also understanding what your key message has been and what it is. So is it, we're still here, we'll be reopening in the meantime, X, Y, and Z? And is it, as we're coming into the easing off of lockdown and reopening potentially, is it about saying, yes, we are still here and this is what we're offering and this is what you can expect from us? Communicating with partners, so your tourism destination management organisation perhaps, and other tourism groups locally, so making sure that you're fitting with the local plan and the plan about how your locality is coming out of lockdown is also really important. So thinking about where you fit with that, making those, I'm sure you're well networked already, but making those links in and how you fit with that. But also this thing about audience. So do we have the skills that are needed to deliver what the audience want? And do we have information and data that you might already have that's helping you to plan for that? So understanding what data you do have and how that can help you make decisions. And do you have information on audiences? Do you have people who haven't used you in the past? What can you realistically deliver? And you know, what's going online, what's on social media, what information and resources are you creating, and how do you know any of this is working? Are you actually evaluating it? Are you using the opportunity with those new contacts to actually say to people, you know, what is it that you will be looking for when we're coming out of lockdown and reopening? And I think I've talked about business plan, but I think the crisis action plan is really important. So you might have thought, well, this is our forward stroke business plan as it stands, but actually we're creating this crisis action plan with some priorities and objectives for the crisis period. Maintaining your risk register, supported by resources and cash flow, really important, obviously. And then regularly reviewing it, checking it's working and adapting it as appropriate. So in a way, I think this section, you might well have done lots of this already. The final section I've got is about potentially reopening and coming out of lockdown. Reopening and what's next. So, okay, so we're deciding we're emerging from lockdown. Here we go. And I think really important is reviewing where you are now, which is obviously what people have been talking about, but actually thinking about where are we now and using some tools to help you decide where you are. And obviously some of the things that we use quite regularly in business planning and thinking ahead is a SWOT. So I'm sure you've done those before. Gives you that framework for assessing your internal strengths, weaknesses and your external opportunities and threats. I think that is quite a useful tool and quite useful to do with a range of people across the organisation. I also think, particularly given what we've been experiencing, what we're in the middle of, that using a PESTLE is, you know, really useful for scanning the external environment. Although it's tough, I actually sat down and tried to do a museum PESTLE on the back, literally on the back of a piece of paper, and it's tough trying to think about, you know, what that means for our sector, but also for your individual museum. But I think it's quite important that you might think about doing that. Both of those tools will help think about issues that are pertinent to your business plan and should feed into the development of aims and objectives and definitely to your risk planning. So if you're able to do any of that sort of work, you know, people might really enjoy doing that. Your staff and volunteers might just want to be sitting down and discussing what the political impact's going to be externally. But I think that might help and definitely provides that framework for the where the business plan can sit. And then I've done this long list, if you like, of things which are about emerging from lockdown generally, thinking about updating your forward stroke business plan, revisiting the key purpose and considering what you want to do now. I just felt sometimes it's really important to go back to remembering what you're there for, why people think you're special, why they visited, what they love about you, what you do brilliantly, and just remembering that people will still remember all those really positive things about your key purpose and understanding what that means. So I just felt that was, you know, there've been some great things, but it's also about understanding what you're there for. What have we learned from this period of working differently? And I think there've been fab examples this afternoon of people saying some things, but also thinking overall what's changed, what are the challenges, and what opportunities are there? What can you learn from others? I've been spending a bit of my time, you know, listening into webinars. I'm sure you have too, but also trying to learn from what other people are doing, not just in our sector, but sort of on the fringes, but also some of the things that are happening abroad, so that might be coming out of lockdown quicker than we are. So some of the learning that's, you know, short films that have been up there. I saw something today, I can't remember who tweeted it now, but there was London Zoo have done a little film about what visitors can expect when they come. So it's on YouTube and it's really quite short, few minutes, really useful. I don't know if anybody else has seen it, but it was just, you know, talking to visitors about literally what they can expect from the minute they arrive. And it had some nice penguins in it. Setting some realistic aims and objectives and a timescale that's achievable. So not setting yourself something that's too far reaching, but looking ahead far enough to understand the money and thinking about what your fundraising plan might be. And then thinking, have we got the skills and capacity to deliver this plan? Do staff, volunteers, governing body, are they skilled enough? And really interesting to know that we've got somebody in the room who they've had a complete change of board, well, not complete, but 4 new board members. I think having a diversity of people on your governing body has never been more important, because it brings with it that different viewpoints, different experiences, different skills that can help organisations think differently. And I think that that's going to be the most important thing, really, about what we do next, where the audiences are going to be, how we deliver what we want to do, and that sort of innovative thinking at a strategic level. So I think that's going to be important, actually. Is there any sharing of resources that you could do with partners and other museums? So is there anything that, you know, when you look around and you think, well, we've got a museum down the road, or we've got a partner, it doesn't have to be a museum, it could be anybody. When you're thinking about the future planning, please make sure that you're including something about business continuity. I'm not sure how many forward plans that I've looked at from museums that have, really. I mean, I suppose this whole pandemic has brought that to the fore. And then communicating your plan, so making sure that you've got that buy-in. That's really important for building confidence. I think emerging from lockdown, a lot of it is going to be about people feeling safe and people feeling confident about coming back to work, but also about visitors feeling confident. And if we've got people on the front line, you know, front of house, they need to feel positive and confident and safe. And then that will exude, you know, good vibes to people who are visiting. And then monitoring, reviewing and revisiting the business plan as often as you need to. So you can have some overarching goals, but I think what Elaine said about that absolutely importance of that regular cash flow monitoring and understanding where the money's coming in and going out is going to be absolutely critical.